So now that we're about to start using Unity's TileMap system, we just need to do a bit of prep work on our sprites. Now we've touched on this before, and I explained the basics of what a sprite sheet is. We're going to go into that a bit more. We're not actually going to use a sprite sheet for the final project here. And this is because Kenny already provides separate art assets for every sprite that's in that tile set. So I'm going to make sure I show you how you can use a normal sprite sheet in case you're using different art and not following along with the same packs. Now this is something you pretty much need to know when working with 2D sprites in Unity, because it's so common that you are going to get a sprite sheet instead of individual art like this. Now the first thing, since we upgraded, we do have this new little window here. If you have this, we don't need AI navigation in our game, so we can just right click and select hide. Now let's go look at our sprites folder, and we're going to look at the platformer pack. So far we're using in the PNG folder underground, we're using the grass platforms. So we're going to use all of these tiles when we start making our game. But if we look in the folder for sprite sheets, we're going to see we have one single image that has all of the artwork in it. Now this one's a bit complicated because it has all kinds of art. So if I click on Sprite Editor here, this will bring it up in the Sprite Editor window, and I can make it a bit bigger so we can see it more. This sheet's pretty complicated if you were to actually use this one, because none of the objects are the same size. So this section here, they're different sizes. Then these are all grid and they're different sizes. And we have some other ones here too. Another nice thing that Kenny does is he separates them in this folder as well. So we can look at it. This is everything on one sheet. But if we want to make it easier on ourselves, we can look and we can see the individual groups. So this one here is what you're going to see most of the time. So if we hit Sprite Editor, we can see the sheet here. And you can see everything sorted into a grid. And if you just look at it, you can see the spacing. So this is one column, this is one row. And then we can see we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 items going this way. And if we look this way, we have 16. So this is a very good structure that you're going to see on a lot of sprite sheets, where you're going to see them in little tiled sections like this. So if you're working with something like this and you want to follow along with your pack, what we can do is let's close out of that. We need to change the sprite mode again from single to multiple. We hit apply. And now if we go into Sprite Editor, so now just like I showed you previously, we can use this slice option. And it does have automatic, but if we used automatic, it only looks for the breaks between objects. So you can see it makes this whole thing one sprite. So that's no good. In this case, the easiest, we could do grid by cell size. We would have to figure out how big each cell is. But since it's a perfect grid, we can just do grid by cell count. And then set it to 8 by 16. And now if we hit slice, you can see each one of these is now a separate image. So if we hit apply, we close out of here, now we can expand this one and we can see every single sprite. Oh, we just have to save this. Okay, so now we see all the separate sprites and you can see them here. Now this is how you would want to do a sprite sheet if that's what you're working off of for your art. And then these are the images we'll use in the next upcoming videos. But since I'm using Kenny and he's already done all of this work for us, we're just going to use that. So I'm going to use everything in these folders here under PNG. The only thing we need to make sure we do is we set the pixels per unit like we did. So we'll set that on each section as we go. Now that we have our sprites sliced, or we already have a package that has them pre-separated like this, we're ready to start working with TileMap. So I've mentioned TileMap before, and basically the way it works is it allows us to make what's called palettes, where we can use a palette, which is a palette full of different sprites like these, and then we can basically paint our level using them. Since we're in a 2D project of Unity, all of these packages should already be included, but just in case you didn't select a 2D package or you did something different and they're not included on there, just to make sure, we can go up to the window menu, go to Package Manager, and then on Package Manager, you should see under Features 2D, and then it's going to list all these packages. And we're going to see 2D TileMap Editor, 2D TileMap Extras. So you should see those already on yours, but if you don't, up here you can select Packages where it says In Project. We can change that to Unity Registry. And then you're going to see the 2D option here. And instead of a remove option, you would have an install option. Or you can select the individual ones for the 2D tile map, and you could just install this one. So these are showing locked on mine because they're part of this 2D package. So all of that should already be done for you, but I just wanted to show how to do that in case you do get any messages popping up when we start using TileMap. If it says you don't have it installed, that's where you install it. Okay, so to get started creating a tile map, all we have to do is create one in the hierarchy, but we're actually going to start a new level because this is just kind of our prototype one. So let's just go to Assets. So let's go up to the File menu, New Scene. It gives us multiple options here. So what we currently have in use here is the Lit 2D URP scene since we created URP. So it doesn't overly matter which we select here, but let's go with the same. So let's open this one. And now we have a scene again, just like we did before. So we have our global light 2D and our main camera and nothing else. Now let's start working with our tile map. So in the hierarchy, let's right click. We go to 2D object. And then you can see we have an option here for tile map. And we have quite a few different ones. Some of these get a bit complicated. We're going to start with just a rectangle because that's all we need for our game here. So let's click this one and it's going to make a rectangle grid. And you can see it highlights tile map. So we can give it a name. Now the different tile maps work kind of like the layers that we used before. So we can put different things on different layers. So for this one, I'm just going to call this ground tile map because this is going to be all of our ground objects. And then the parent object here it made called grid. We want to kind of be specific of what that is so we know. So I'm just going to rename that to tile maps. That way all of our tile maps are going to go under this one. Now to actually start using the tile map, what we want to do is go up to the window menu, go to 2D, and then we want tile palette. Now this window is just like any other window. So you can find what you think is the best for your workflow of where you want to put this. What I usually like doing is docking it right here to the right of my game window. So then I can work in the scene here and then all of my tile stuff is right here. So you might like it better to the left or below or a separate monitor. That's completely your preference. And one thing we just forgot to do here is to actually save our scene. So I'm just going to hit Control S, or you can go up to File and Save. So up here, and we can select Save. It's going to bring up the window asking us where to save. So I'm going to select the Scenes folder, and I'm just going to call this Game. We'll rename this later, but for now I want it to stand out from the sandbox scene we had before, so we know this is going to be the main game part. So now we have the tile palette window open here, but we haven't created a palette yet. So we're going to do that in the next video. Now in this video, we're going to carry on and we're going to keep looking at tile map and we're going to look at tile palettes. So now just like the name implies, we're basically making a palette just like a painter or anybody would have with all their different colors, except we're going to use our tiles that we're going to paint. So in our tile palette window we opened here, you can resize the actual palette part by clicking and dragging here. This is where we're going to create the tiles. Now, as I mentioned, this is kind of like an artist's palette of his paint colors. So we can make a separate palette for any grouping that we want. Usually what I'll do is I'm going to keep everything separate for different levels. So if you compare something like, say, a Super Mario Brothers game, the style of art in each level is usually quite different than others. So you can group that in a palette. So that way you're not looking at all the art assets for your whole game at once. You're just looking at something very small. So it's kind of a subset. So we could make a palette for just our platforms that are grass, which are the ones that we've currently been using. Now, before we make the palettes, one thing to mention here is we do want to make sure our pixels per unit is set. So we've already done that for these, but if you're using a different pack, or say if you pick different ones that we haven't used yet, like this planet one, notice they're by default 100 pixels per unit again. So we still need to make them match. So you need to make them fit. And in this case, this art is 128 by 128. So if we set pixels per unit to 128, that means this is going to fit inside one Unity block. So let's create our first palette. So up here where it says no valid palette, click the drop down and you get create new palette. So I'm going to create one here and I'm going to call this grass platforms. Actually, grass platforms palette, just so it's very specific. Now the defaults here are fine. We want all of those. So let's just hit create. Now we have to pick where to save it. So this is in our project folder here. I want to go back to assets. So that's like going to the top level. And I'm going to create a folder here called tiles. Now I'm just going to open that one and hit select folder. So now we can see that's the palette we have selected. And if we scroll up, if we go to assets, we now have this tiles folder. So if we go in here, we have this object. Now this one here is basically, think of it almost like a prefab. So this is basically a prefab of just this palette. And now once we start creating things in here, they're going to save into this folder. So let's go back to our grass folder. I'm going to select the first image and hold shift, click the last. So now I have all the grass objects selected. Let's drag them into our palette and let go. Now it's going to ask us to save again. I want to put them all in the same spot. So if I go into tiles, I'm going to try to keep this a bit clean. You could put them all right into the tiles folder, but I want to make this a bit nicer and cleaner. So I'm going to hit new folder and I'm going to call this one grass platforms. I'll hit select folder. Now, before we talk about this, let's look back in our project folder here. So if we go to tiles, notice now our prefab one that we talked about for this tile palette, you can see in the icon, it has all the images. And if we go into the grass platformer, you see every one of these has a tile object here. Now, if we select one, you can see we have a bit of options. We could change the sprite image being used. We can change the color, and then we have options for colliders. Don't worry about the collider right now. That's something we're going to deal with later. But if you wanted, you can actually start changing the color in tint here, and you notice it changes. So that's how we create our first one. In this window, I can use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out, just like in the scene. And if you hold the Alt key and then left click, you can drag around. Now, if we start selecting these grids, we can notice by default here, these images didn't show up properly. So we only have a corner of them. So each one is taking a quarter of 4 different tiles. So we don't want this. We need to go back into our grass. Now, the reason this is happening is because we modified the pivot. So remember, if we go into a new one we haven't touched, so say sand, and we select it, the pivot set to center. Because of the way we were designing our game earlier, we changed that pivot to be the bottom left. We now need to set that back. So let's select all of these and let's change the pivot right here to center, hit apply. And now notice it fixed it here. So that's something to keep an eye out for as well. Now, if we click in here to select each one, you see we get just the tile. Now, if I select this one here, by default, it puts the paintbrush on. This means I can click in our scene and I can just start painting. Now, obviously, this isn't how we want a platform to look, but you can see how easy this is going to make creating our game level. Now we also have an eraser here. So if I hit eraser, I can erase whatever I created. We have a fill option. So you can see it's going to fill the whole section just from dragging my mouse around. Now we have a move option. So this one, if you select it and you click on something, you can't click and drag. What you have to actually do is use the select option first. So we can select, say, these three right now. Then if I select move, now I can move them around. Okay, and then we also have a fill option here. So this just lets me click and drag, and whatever's in the box I'm dragging is going to fill with what I have selected. Okay, so those are just some of the basics of how to paint in our game. The main thing I want to show you on this video, though, is working with the palette itself. We're going to talk about making our level a lot more later. So let's go here. We have the select option. If I select this one, you can see we have some options for each of the tiles that we create in here. So in here we have the rotation and the scale still, as well as the color. So the main one I want to talk about is the rotation and the scale, and how we can edit objects in here. So if I select this one here, what I like to do is group all these objects together, and we need to create a couple additional ones here. First thing I want to do is move this one here. So I have it selected. If I hit the move button, notice I can't just move it. If I drag, it's just dragging a selection. If I mouse over this little pencil, it says toggles tile palette edit. If we hit that, now I can click and select this one, hit move, and I can move this in my palette. So now if I start moving these around, I can group them however I want here. So this is really your preference, how you make your map. And it is a bit annoying that if you're just doing one at a time, you kind of have to click back and forth between the tools. But it is handy to come up with a system you like here. As well, you can make this tile palette window bigger. So finding a way to line them up that works for you is kind of an art in itself. I'm just going to show you a bit what I like to do. So like this angled platform, what I'm going to do is group it with this one because these go together. So I want to have them right in the same spot. That way, if I want to paint with something like that, I can select both at once and paint them in the scene. I don't have to keep clicking back and forth. So I'm going to do the same with this guy here. I'll do this one over here. Take this one next. I'm going to take both of these. I'll move these up, say maybe here. I'm going to select all of these, move these out of the way. And now you don't have to do any of this. This is just complete preference. So I'm setting it up the way I like it to be. You find what works for you, and if the default one works for you, that's fine. Now all of these thin ones, I want these kind of grouped in the same spot too. So I'm just going to put them here. So now I'm grouping these because if you zoom in, you see these three go together. And then this one has rounded edges on both, so it doesn't duplicate to the next one correctly because it's supposed to be a single object. Now I'm doing the same thing with this one here. So this is the left piece. We're going to put this on the left. These are the right. So now I have that platform. So it's bit spread out. You can pack it a lot closer however you want. As I start adding more things to this palette, I clean this up a lot. So just find something that works for you, and then we'll continue on and talk about this more in the future videos. Okay, so this is how I'm going to leave mine for now. Now, in this case, I have both edges, but one thing I want to show you that's common as well is pieces like this, or even these left and right pieces. A lot of the time in art packs that you get, it's only going to include the one side and not the other, because they expect you to just rotate or flip it. So if you need to do that, what you can do here is we can select one of these. Let's go back into edit mode. If we select one of these, we can select the paintbrush, and I can paint inside here. Okay, so I have this one, so I'm going to paint one here. So now I have a duplicate of it. Let's go back to selection mode, and with it selected, I can change either the scale. So one thing I could do is I could set it to -1 instead of 1, and that's going to rotate it. Or we can just do the actual rotation. So both of these achieve the same goal. So remember, this is something you may have to do if you're using your own art packs. If it doesn't include the same tiles, you can modify them inside of the game itself on the tile map. So if we select, say, this one here, we could rotate this on any axis. So this is going to look weird, but I flip it upside down. We could do that, but we don't want to have to go in and do that through our entire game. So let's just change that back, because if we're painting a whole level, that means we're going to have to keep going back, clicking, modifying them as we go. It's really going to slow down our workflow. Whereas if we do that and set that up inside of our palette, every time we want to use that particular tile in that rotation, we just click on it in the palette, click paint, and we paint it in the scene. So it's really going to optimize your workflow if we have every type of tile we want ahead of time. And these are things that just come with practice. So as we progress making our level, you're going to get much faster with this, and it's going to become second nature. So it's really tricky at first, but it's really easy once you get the hang of it. Okay, so I'll see you in the next video.